Yep, brilliant.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oops. Harriet, you're on mute. You came on for a second and then went back to mute. Yeah, now it's fine.
Yeah, right, bear with me. Yeah, is that clear?
Yep, it is. It's clear. Yep.
Yep, and you can see the presentation.
Yep, you can.
Brilliant. So I'll start again. So I just want to thank everyone for coming and taking time out to understand what bird ringing is. So my name's Harriet Day, and I'm a licensed bird ringer for the BTO, the British Trust of Ornithology. I am also a group member of Sarby Breck's ringing group. And how it works with the BTO is we then get put into local areas. So my local area in Rotherham in England is Sheffield. So we're put into a group so that it's cheaper funding for the rings, and we go out as a group together or individually. So I am a C licence ringer, which means that I have got a licence to go out and ring alone now. So I'll just talk about the history. So the history of bird ringing, the bird ringing scheme first started in 1909. There was two schemes that was running alongside each other. One taken place by Harry Witherby and one at the Aberdeen University. That started by Arthur Thompson, and a third scheme was organised by Country Life magazine. But unfortunately, the rings wasn't uniquely numbered and it didn't work out so well. So the Aberdeen scheme ended during the First World War, and in 1930s, following the foundings of BTO, the British Trust of Ornithology, the scheme was then transferred back to its current home in England, and that was then where the scheme developed more and much stronger. So I'm just going to talk about the BTO and what's involved. So who are the BTO? The BTO are the British Trust for Ornithology. It's a UK charity based. It's focused on understanding birds, and they also are really good at getting people involved in citizen science from any age, young age, middle-aged, older ages. And the surveys that they put together for people to get involved and become as a volunteer are all about understanding the population and looking at an incline and a decline. Water birds in particular at the moment, that seems to be the one that people are signing up to due to the avian flu, monitoring the waterfowl population. Now, there's a link below, and if you wanted to have a look at the BTO and some of the surveys and schemes that they run, you're more than welcome to. One of the schemes that I first started off as before bird ringing, because my passion for this started at a young age, I used to go out with my dad on his days off, and he used to go fishing, and I had to go with him, and it all started from a kingfisher for me. And then as I got older, I learned a bit more about bird ID and started to understand what I was actually seeing. And then as I got more older, I realised that how much these birds are declining, and unfortunately I don't think there's going to be some that's our future generations going to see. So I wanted to protect it. So I signed up to BTO, and the first survey that I ever did for the BTO was a tawny owl project. And each night you had to go out for 20 minutes at 8 p.m. and listen to your surroundings and see if you heard any tawny owls in your area. That project then finished after 12 months, and the data that got back from that showed that we had declining tawny owls. However, in urban areas, seem to be more popular. A few more surveys that I've carried out have also been the nest recording scheme. So that's monitoring bird nests, and each month throughout spring into summer, you attend a nest, and you can also have a look at the population between any bird that you're monitoring, blackbirds, greenfinch, goldfinch, and you can also see if in that month there's a decline in chicks. So unfortunately last year, it was a really bad year for blue tits. Not many blue tits survived, and the reason for that being is due to a shortage on caterpillars and also due to the weather. So that's another really good scheme that you can get involved in. And obviously there's the bird ringing scheme. So the BTO are absolutely brilliant, and again they also rely on donations and fundraising. So if you're interested to have a look at that, that'll be brilliant. The link's below. So I just want to tell you what bird ringing involves. So bird ringing is fantastic. You've got to be passionate about it, as it consists of very early morning starts. So some mornings in the summer, you can start from at least 4 a.m. and then in winter at 7 a.m. The reason for this is you want to put the mist nets up in the dark. Now, mist nets are a net that is fine mesh. It's safe for the bird, and it is positioned with 2 poles. Now, the nets can be up to 30 foot, 60 foot, and we tend to get there early in the morning while it's still dark to put the nets up, so that when the birds come out of the roost, then we've got a better chance of being able to catch the birds. But I must stress this to you. The mist nets are only available to purchase if you have a license. So it's not as though anyone can just order them off the internet. You've got to be able to declare your identification and prove that you've got a license for these nets. And this is one of the reasons why it takes a lot of training and involvement in being able to learn how to extract the bird safely out of the net. So extracting birds can take up to 4 years to gain onto your license. So each from any bird in particular, the wrens. So the wren's the smallest bird, and obviously the goldcrest is the smallest bird in Europe, a migration bird. So you need to reach a certain amount, the criteria of ringing so many goldcrests, so many wrens, and then obviously the bigger birds. So all this is taken into consideration when applying for your license to move on from a trainee to a C ringer. So also, once the nets are up, we check them 7 minutes in between. So we don't leave the nets no longer than 7 minutes. And when it's a colder day, then obviously we check them more frequently. We tend to put, depending how many people, if we go out as in a group, we can put up to 2 nets up, or we can put up to 5 nets. However, if you've got a feeding site, we tend to just put 1 net up because birds are encouraged and attracted by the feed, so you're guaranteed to catch more birds. Also, I want to talk about the weather. We do not ring in any rain, wind, or below minus freezing conditions. So unfortunately this weekend, I haven't been out ringing because at home it was -4 degrees. So birds tend to lose their body fat through the heat. So if it's a really cold night, in particular robins can lose up to 10% of their body fat on a cold night. So they need to preserve the energy. So flying around is obviously to try and keep them warm, but at the same time it's burning that fat. So we wouldn't want to go out ringing and put any birds at risk and encourage that. So we tend to not do it. Now, also, all the data from the rings are recorded onto a sheet. That includes the ring number, the bird itself, the age, the sex. That tends to be taken place in more of the springtime, being able to sex them. And also we record weight, wing measurement. And if they're migrating, we record fat and muscle. So all that data is put, and also we record molt as well in spring. But all that data is just basically typed up rough, and then when we come home, we have a database called Demon. So this is a new database because before there was an old one, but this is the more up-to-date database. So it's all online, run through the BTO. And all our numbers and each bird and its location is then typed into Demon, so that if there is any more retraps, so if that bird migrates and that bird's recaptured, that bird pings up with its own identification, the location it was ringed, the person that put the ring on, the age, the sex. So all that data is gathered together. Then also, obviously we'll release the birds after we've got all that data. And and I just wanted to talk to you about some of the equipment that we use. So I'll just go on to that. Right, so aging birds, one in particular, I've made this a little bit easy because aging birds is quite difficult. So the easiest bird that I feel for a beginner to age is a blue tit, because you're looking for a contrast. Now, each bird is aged based on its greater coverts. So I'm just going to show you what these greater coverts are. So you're looking at the greater coverts on this particular image, and these are what we mainly age birds on. Now, alongside that, there's other criterias. So you can also go on colour variation in the eye. You can also go on the tail feather shape and size. And with robins, you can also go on the upper mandible. So, but most birds are aged by greater coverts. In the springtime into summer, adults migrate their primary feathers, and that is when we're able to know if this is an adult, because juveniles don't do that. So this is a blue tit. So I just want to show you what you're looking at. So these greater coverts here, because this colour of the blue is not in line with these greater coverts and they are much darker, because they are really dark and they're more grey and not in line, and that contrast is quite obvious, this bird would make it a juvenile. So this bird's a young bird. However, if all these feathers here, these greater coverts, was the same colours of this blue, then this would make it an adult. Now, it's not always that simple. Blue tits are easier because they're quite a vibrant colour. But yeah, bullfinches, and also there's certain birds that you can't always age unless you know confidently that they are a young bird. So long-tailed tits, tree sparrows, house sparrows, starlings, and they are the type of birds that unfortunately do a full complete wing molt, so making it difficult to age. Now, sometimes you can tell in spring if you've got a younger long-tailed tit. Their eyes are much pinker around the edges, and you can just tell, and it's quite obvious. But having moving into June, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to age them. So how we age the birds is just before winter time. How we age the birds is a 3. On the aging system, a 3 makes this a juvenile, and then you've got a 4, which means you're not sure, and that's okay not to be sure, because you're not saying that it can't be aged at all. And then you've also got a 5, which then makes it an adult. So this bird in winter would be a 3, because you can see here that there's a complete contrast. Another feature you can look at, so you can look at the tail, and we can also do allula scores, which complicates things. So aging birds is not that easy, and again, this is why you require more training in enabling to get your license. Again, with certain birds such as the robin, as I mentioned earlier, on the beak here in the bird's mouth on the top, that is what you call your upper mandible. So you're looking for a colour. So if the mandible is more of a yellow colour, then that indicates a younger bird, where in an adult it'd be a much more pinky colour. Again, migrant birds such as your chiffchaffs, they're a lot more order to age. So you tend to then go onto the tail. You're looking at if the tail is broad, if it's rounded. You're also looking if there's any worn, and sometimes you can see fault bars, and a fault bar means that when you're looking at the tail, you can sometimes see a line, and you don't get often to see this unless the bird's in your hand, which is absolutely amazing that we can see this. And when you look at the tail, you can see a line going across the tail, and this is due to the chick being in the nest and not having enough food. So it's down to not having enough nourishment in its diet, and that also indicates that that's a young bird. And again, we wouldn't get this if it wasn't for ringing. We wouldn't get all this data. So I'm just going to move on to what happens to the rings. So the question asked are, do the rings hurt the birds? No. So, and how much does the ring weigh? So the average ring itself, let me just show you. So these are the rings. I'm hoping you can see them. These are the rings, and the ring in particular for a blue tit weighs 0.05 gram. So it's very, very light. So they're very lightweight, so they're not weighing the bird down in any way. And the question is, what are the rings made out of? They are made out of aluminium magnesium. So again, making it lighter, not weighing the bird down. And I suppose it's just like us wearing a bracelet or a ring, I suppose. You're not necessarily feeling it. And also the ring itself, even when in the nest, the ring is designed to fit the bird's leg for the rest of its life. So people sometimes say, do you have to catch the bird to then take the ring off to put a new one on when it becomes an adult? That's also what you'd think, and that is a good question. But the answer to that is no. So when the bird is in the nest, between 5 days to 7 days old, that what we call on the bird's leg, the tortoise, is actually already developed and it is already fully grown. So we put the ring, also when we do the chicks in the nest, we put the ring on, and that ring will be fine for the rest of its life. So we don't have to re-catch the bird and take that ring off. The ring numbers that are put onto the database so that the birds migrate and are retrapped, we can monitor that. So we can monitor the growth that bird's travelled, we can monitor the growth that bird's developed, and we can also monitor the distance that bird's travelled, alongside the survival rate, especially that's important for migrant birds. Also, we've learned that we're having a lot of black caps that seem to be wintering, staying here for the winter rather than migrating back. So that's been quite interesting, recatching some of our black caps that we've ringed previous years and in the spring, and to know that they are still around in the middle of winter is starting to is obviously showing that there's enough food that's around for them to feed on, rather than them taking that risk to migrate back home. It also helps us monitor the population for effects of climate change and the migration patterns. Now, the role of climate change has had a massive effect on a lot of wildlife. I mean, unfortunately, we've had really hot temperatures that's created wildfires, which was also taken place down in Norfolk. There was quite a lot of nests that didn't survive. We've also noticed as a ringing group itself that red storks are much larger, and this bird in particular in this top corner, this is a blackbird, a male blackbird, and we believe it was a migrant due to the wing size. So on average, our blackbird wing is 131 millimeters, and this one was 136, showing a much bigger wing length. And I think sometimes when you look at these, you can see that they're much black and they're much glossier. And when you see the presence just in the garden or in a park, you can see that they're much bulkier birds. So there's every chance that it could have migrated from Scandinavia, but we are seeing much increase. Well, the wing length is just much bigger than our UK birds. And again, it's not just the fires that's taken a problem. We've had a lot of floods as well in previous years. So again, it's flooding that habitat and that vegetation. And we've had a massive decline in willow tits, unfortunately. Chiff-chaffs, we've started to learn from the data. So all the data that goes in is obviously inputted back out and put into an annual report, and it's showing that chiff-chaffs are actually laying their eggs 12 days earlier than what they used to. And I've done quite a lot with swallows this year, which I'm going to go on to talk about later on in the presentation. But unfortunately, due to we had 2 days in August where we was reaching temperatures of 42, which was a first for the UK, and sadly I lost quite a few nests due to basically the egg. It was sadly cooking in the nest due to the heat. And some of the birds that I was monitoring, some of the nest was inside buildings and also an artificial sand mountain bank. Unfortunately, they didn't survive. So all this data that we're getting, and unfortunately, a lot of it is down to climate change that we are noticing. So that's got a lot to answer to. So the equipment used. So again, a lot of people ask me, how do you put the rings on, and how do you use some of the equipment such as the rulers, and how do you weigh the birds? So this is one of the swallow chicks. So our word for chicks is pullus. So that's when you see the word pullus, that's what we refer to. So a swallow chick in the nest. And again, this was on a farm where the chicks was weighing much heavier in the nest compared to some of the farms. And the reason being to that was I noticed that the chicken farms in the UK and the farms that had horses, there was more insects, which was producing much heavier chicks. But I'll go on to talk about that later on. So I just want to show you the pliers. Again, I'm hoping you can see these. So these are the pliers that we put the rings on. So I'm just going to show you. I can squeeze as hard as I can with both hands and they are not going anywhere. They've been designed and molded to the bird's leg and the shape of the rings. So what we would do is we would take a ring, we would write the ring number down, we would put the ring in the pliers, and then gently we would put it onto the bird's leg. Once the ring's on, because that's the first thing you need to do, you need to make sure that ring's on because it's been happening in the past where birds do manage to escape out of the cotton bags. So these are the bags that we put them in. These are designed for the birds itself. So this size bag would be something I'd put a robin in or a wren. Bigger bags are for such as redwings, blackbirds, and then the bigger is your birds of prey. So this bag, again, like I said, is designed for the bird, breathable bags. Once the ring's on, the next important thing to do first is to age the bird. So as I discussed earlier about the greater coverts and the way we age them. Also, we then take a wing measurement. So this ruler again has been designed for the bird's wing. So the wing goes right to the top and then we gently squeeze to push that in and then we get as result. We also can weigh birds like that, obviously the chicks, because they're not going to be going anywhere. But we also use weighing pots, which are the same on the scales, but we put the birds into the pots. So again, this is a wren size, blue tit size, and then this is more like a dunnock size, the bigger the birds. And we also recycle Pringle pots and whatever we can get our hands onto, rather than using plastic quite a lot. So again, with the rings get bigger in size. So the rings that I showed you before is that these rings are what you'd put on a blue tit. These are what we call earrings. And then going on bigger sizes, these rings are what we'd put on a blackbird. And again, you can see how the hole gets bigger. And then eventually, when you've got something like a barn owl or something exciting as that, then we're going to much bigger pliers, and also swans and geese. So I hope that's covered quite a lot of your questions. And obviously I explained about the mist nets. The mist nets actually fit in when they are compact. They fit into a bag this size. And again, we have to be careful with those, not to get them tangled, because the last thing you want early in the morning when it's pitch black is a tangled net. And we ensure to disinfect his nets and maintain them thoroughly. So I just want to talk to you about some of the recoveries that's been taken place through bird ringing. So some of the data. So this little goldcrest, this was actually one of my first recoveries, and it was awesome. So back in England, we head to the east coast, which is obviously more just off the sea. So in October is the best time for migration birds that are coming in, such as your goldcrest, your redwings, your fieldfares. It's an exciting time of year. And this little goldcrest, I remember being at Flamborough Bird Observatory and approaching the net, And this little goldcrest, the male goldcrest, and the reason why I'm saying male, some of you might know, some of you might not, the male has a much brighter orange head, just there. So this was a male, and it came in weighing 5.6 grams, and it had a Norwegian ring on. And eventually we got the data back, and this little goldcrest was ringed 3 years previous, and it had travelled 650 kilometres, which was an awesome fact to think that a bird that small, one of the smallest birds in the UK, had migrated that distance and survived all across the sea, and came inland to, obviously, for food. Also, another exciting recovery, which I had last year now in November. The beginning of the year, we rung some sparrowhawk chicks in a nest, and I've got a picture of those at the end of the presentation to show you. And the sparrowhawk chicks in the nest, there was, I believe there was two males and one female. And I got a recovery back saying that the female had been seen in a garden which was 8 kilometres away from where she was originally rung. Unfortunately, she was up to mischief, killing all the pigeons in this gentleman's garden. But it was nice to know that she survived, and she's also managed to survive the harsh winter. So again, if it wasn't for ringing, we wouldn't get that data back. The oldest bird in the world, wild bird, that's also ringed is the albatross. And this bird is 71 years old, and it's much older than me and probably some of us, but the bird itself was ringed by a gentleman, and again, we wouldn't get that data back, and no one would even believe that an albatross would have lived 71 years old. And also, a very interesting one was the razorbill, which is 41 years old, which was actually ringed on the island of Bardsey, which I'm hoping to hopefully go and venture out and do some ringing on that island this year. So yeah, so getting some of this data back, it's wonderful to know that you're actually putting all that time and effort, because again, it's volunteered, we don't get paid for it. We'll go out in the field sometimes in cold mornings, and sometimes, you don't always want to get out of bed at that early in the morning when you've been working through the week, but it's good to know that this is why we do it. So, oh yeah, the sparrowhawk pictures are here. So this is actually another nest. There was two of each. There was two males, two females in this one. And if you can actually see that the females are much bigger. If you can see here how big she is compared to the males. Now, I just want to talk to you a little bit on about the sparrowhawks. So when we come to do a nest, with the birds of prey, sparrowhawks and barn owls, but sparrowhawks in particular, we use a caliper. And the reason for that being is what we do, we measure the tortoise, and we also measure the head to beak, so sometimes called skull to beak, so whichever way, but we take measurements. And the reason why we take measurements is because the female is always much bigger, so she requires a bigger ring, and again, she'll wear that for the rest of her life. So this caliper allows us to be able to sex these in the nest. Now, the males, hopefully, I didn't have any data back from these, but I do know that they all fledged, so I'd like to think they all survived. But the males grow much quicker in the nest, because if not, sadly, the sisters will eat the brothers. So she's a much bigger bird, and if they don't get out of the nest first, which they are required to grow quicker than the females, especially with the primaries and the flight feathers, to get out of the nest, because if not, and food's abundant, unfortunately, her little brother will become prey, which is quite sad, but it's nature. So to get open nests on your ringing license, it can take much longer. It requires a certain amount of birds in particular that you ring to be able to get an open nest on your license. So when we go to a nest box, so again, people ask me, how do you ring a nest box? So when we go to a nest box, we roughly know when a female will be on eggs. So for example, a great tit, I'll use great tits as an example. So what we do, we determine whether or not.
This meeting is being recorded.
We then work on a timing as to whether the eggs will have hatched, and then we make sure that we do as research to go back so that the chicks are between average 5 days old. When we go back to the nest, we do the same routine, but this time what we do, we bung the nest. So we put a bag into the hole. If mum's on the nest, we will take mum out and we'll ring her separately. Then we'll do the chicks, we'll ring the chicks, we'll put those back into the nest, we'll put mum on top, and we'll leave this plugged in for 5 minutes. We then come away and remove the bag from out of the nest, and mum will remain on the nest. So that's how we approach a nest box itself. Now, an open nest is much different, but what we do, we use the same method. We approach an open nest, we take the chicks, we then put the bag onto the open nest and we get out of the way so that mum doesn't see us. Mum will only abandon the nest if she sees the nest is empty and that the chicks have gone. However, if there's something covering the nest, then she doesn't see that. So that's why it's important that we cover the nest and we get out of the way. We'll work as fast as we can to put the chicks back into the nest, and then later on we go back the third time to see if they've fledged. Unfortunately, it's not always successful, and chicks do die in the nest due to lack of food, or again down to the climate, hot weathers, flooding. So, but that's how we monitor as open nests. I've also got an artificial sand martin bank that's operated at Sheffield, and this is the first time it's been occupied this year. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, the chick didn't survive due to the temperatures. But again, it's nice to know that they're starting to use that. So this looks like a shed from the back, and you open it up, and each compartment has got a number, and you slide that across, and it's like a tunnel with sand in, and the chicks will be there. And again, you do the same. You make sure that hole is bunged for her not to gain back in if she's not already on the nest, and see that nest is empty. So this year, I've set myself a little target. I wanted to maintain swallows, and I was able to ring 101 swallows in the nest. So again, this was open nest. It was quite successful, but unfortunately, there was quite a lot that I noticed with the swallows that had migrated back, and some had not always been successful at returning back home to their breeding grounds. Now, this could be multiple reasons itself. It could mean that again, the birds may be old and not able to migrate. There could be a problem on the migration pattern, and also, unfortunately, there's also a risk of them being captured on the migration flight paths. So this year, I've just been able to raise some money by making my own bird calendars and selling them to raise funds for GPS tags so that they can be fitted to the birds in August, and we can get some data back from that. So that's an ongoing project. But some of the swallows, as I mentioned before, it seemed to be the people that had chicken farms and horses. They was using quite a lot of the chicken feathers to line the nest with, and also the horsehair, which the horsehair was quite a little bit risky, as they would line the cup of the nest, which that was fine because it was a better heat source for them. However, in the hot summer, it's had the opposite effect, and unfortunately, not caused them any harm, but there's always that risk of the horse's hair, the tail in particular, being caught around the bird's neck. So sometimes it's just worth monitoring that nest, which I have been. Also, one of the nests in particular failed on a farm, and that was due to quite a lot of the swallows nesting in the barns, and obviously with it being a hot tin roof, the heat's penetrated onto the hot tin roof and then caused the eggs to cook in the nest. So I've got quite a lot of data back this year from the swallows, and I've also looked in some of the areas that they are not breeding, and they're not even returning. And again, that's due to quite a lot of farmers not having livestock anymore, and a lot of pesticides used, and lack of insects for them to forage on. So it all affects the diet, and also it just shows that how you as a person can give that advice out to people and to farmers to make a difference itself, because without people making a difference, then these people who operate in the farms, they genuinely don't know what it is they need to do, and it's not always that they're not willing to. I mean, I've been quite lucky that these people have been really helpful and willing to go along with the information that I provided them, because they've seen them come into their farms a lot of years, and it's quite sad that they're not returning. So hopefully 2023 is going to be a better year for swallows, fingers crossed. So migration patterns. So migration patterns have increased, and the reason for migration is always down to food, and also where it's much milder. So the redwings, blackbirds, fieldfares and waxwings migrate to the UK for our winter berries, as you know. And this year, sometimes we call them invasions. So we call them invasions, and that's invasion of bramblings, invasion of waxwings. And that means when we have an abnormal amount of these certain birds come, and that is when you know it's been a bad year in their countries for food. So this year we've had an invasion of waxwings. The last time we had an invasion of waxwings was about 5 years ago now. That was due to Scandinavia not having enough berries, winter berries. And again, it's happened this time. So again, it's down to climate change and other factors that these birds are migrating more in an invasion for winter berries. So I have been lucky enough to see some waxwings this year, not far from me. Also, again, there's quite a lot of redwing numbers, and then we've had quite a lot of greenfinch, I've noticed through ringing data, what's been arriving. So that's quite interesting. Again, bramblings, not so much this year, but I always remember actually ringing on the East Coast, and I didn't realise until that time it was happening that jays was really rare to be seen. The bird species was really rare to see on the East Coast. And this particular day, there was quite a lot of numbers passing. And the reason for that was in Wales, there was a really bad year for acorns, and there wasn't enough. And jays was actually migrating to be able to forage for acorns. And there was moving across the headlands on the East Coast, which was giving some really good numbers for East Yorkshire, as that's not something they get to see and record. So to have that many on the headlands was quite interesting, and you can see how desperate there was to forage for acorns. Also the migration. So if it wasn't for bird ringing, people wouldn't actually know that birds migrate. We haven't got the software, we haven't got Google, which is brilliant for everything. We didn't have that back in that era. So the myths started in the 1900s, that basically they believed, the local people, that swallows and swifts used to hibernate in the bottom of ponds, and also they believed that they hibernated in mud. Now, this is just a fiction drawing of somebody's diary that they believed and saw. This is what they saw without the birds. People putting nets in ponds, trying to fish birds out in the winter, believing that that's where they used to hibernate. They didn't realise that these birds travelled all the way back to South Africa. So that's really cool to think that that was someone's belief, and now with all the ringing system and all this data and everything that we get out of bed for and do in the morning, just proves that picture as to what it's not. So yeah, it's quite interesting to think that that's what people believed. So again, I'd like to give you as much advice as I can if it's something you're interested in signing up to, if you want to become a bird ringer. Obviously different countries have their own schemes. So most one in particular, I mean, I always revert back to BTO because that's the one that we use, but BTO is also, it's got a lot to answer for, and it also gives you quite a lot of knowledge that you'll need and how to get involved. So I'm just going to give you the basic. So when I clicked on to the BTO website, it gives you the link for bird ringing, and it says find myself a trainer to my local area. That again might work for some of the other websites that you could have a look to and refer to. And then what's really important, because again, it takes up to 4 to 5 years to get your license. But the most important thing is that you know what bird you put in a ring on. You wouldn't be able to put a ring on a bird if you didn't know what it was. It wouldn't be safe to the bird. So this is quite a good book, and the one on the screen, or whatever you're familiar with to get your bird ID up, particular passerines, and then obviously moving on to anything that's bigger than that. But this book in particular, it's got all the identification in it. It breaks it down. It makes it so easy for you. So definitely worth investing in a good book. Also, this is another book that I use. This is actually a ringer's book. It's also available in French and some other languages. So the identification guide to birds in the hand. So this has got everything you need to know about it. In the book, it shows you how to age birds, what criteria they go on, and things that we've already talked about, but in much depth. I stress this to you, it's always worth taking notes. If there's anything that you've learned or there's anything that you've picked up on, if you're out in the field, just always take notes. I mean, I'm always buying sticky notes and making my own notes to simplify things. And plus, I think I've just got a mad collection of books, which it's always worth having. But take notes as much as you can. I always printed this off. I mean, it's quite good if you can get up to date. So this is just something to hand. It tells you all the rings, numbers, and things like that. So, and what should go on what bird. It's worth trying to be one step in front if that's something you're signing up to. And it's going to be quite good if you know, and it's going to make you look good if you know what rings you're putting on birds when you're first training. I also make myself some little laminate sheets because, as I said before, we also record fat and muscle on migration birds. So certain birds in particular, like I mentioned, the goldcrest, we look at the bird and we are checking for the muscles, so we feel for that, and we can see if that bird's gained weight and if the muscle's quite strong. So if the bird comes in with a really low weight, then you know that the bird's it's migrating, it's back. But sometimes you can also know that if the bird has quite a lot of fat and quite a lot of muscle, then you know that bird's ready for going, especially with a chiffchaff or willow warblers, which migrate before chiffchaffs because they've got more distance to go at. You can really tell that they've put on a lot of fat and muscle. So handy things like that to have in the field, just to reflect on. It's always worth that. And be prepared for very early mornings and days out in the field. If you're not an early morning person, but this is something you want to do, maybe just a few times a week, set your alarm a little bit earlier just to get into some kind of routine. And make sure you've got enough layers on because it is a bit chilly first thing in the morning. So I hope that's covered everything. I'm really grateful for you for listening. And these are some of the pictures throughout last summer that was taken. A nest, one of the swallow nests, which successfully hatched all 4. And this was one of the barn owls, which was experienced quite a lot of big broods this year. One in particular, a brood of 7 barn owls, which I don't believe has ever been recorded before. So yeah, it's been a good year last year for ringing. So I'm hoping you might have got some questions for me, which I'm very happy to answer. Let me go back to the meeting.
If you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or just put it in the chat.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that I've covered everything and that you've all enjoyed this today. And I'm hoping I've inspired you to maybe get involved or help out in a local project. And if you're not happy in muting yourself to ask a question, feel free to pop it into the chat.
Yeah, I don't think there are any questions. So,
Yeah.
thanks for your time. I'm putting the YouTube link on our on the chat box right now. So do subscribe. The recording of this should be out by about tomorrow.
Yeah, brilliant.
So yeah, I'll send it to you by email, and whoever else wants to see the recording, just please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks.
Yep, fantastic. Thank you ever so much, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for listening.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone. Thank you. Bye.